So I have this one song stuck in my head. It's the song that we played at the beginning today of our worship service, and it's this song called "Monsters" by James Blunt, where it's a father and son talking at end of life. You can understand why I've been thinking about it. During my father's passing, my brother reminded me of this song, and then I found out that another singer, Aim Tangian, became American Idol's winner in 2023, and this is the song that he sang. So there's other versions of it, and it's beautiful, and it's a beautiful and haunting narrative of a son talking to his dying father, and it's a real tearjerker. And and I just, interestingly enough, as I pulled into the reception following the funeral that I did, that came on the radio. So I just thought it was such a powerful song. But one sentence or phrase kind of jumped out at me, and that was there was a phrase in it that said, "There's no need to forgive, no need to forget. You know your mistakes, and you know mine." A sentence that I believe really speaks the power of a really authentic relationship with someone. You really deeply know each other. And the power of really knowing another person authentically is when is something that is really truly one of the greatest gifts that we can have in our lifetime. If you know someone authentically and they know you authentically, it's beautiful. And it's a value I believe that most of us cherish. Uh, it's interesting, in my cultural translation training that I've been doing, I ask participants if they would share their top six values. And the number one value across all the groups that I've been doing is, you guessed it, authenticity. Last week's discussion here at the church, Matthew Morris shared the power in his life when he heard a message he felt was from God, guiding him, that said, "Come as you are, be authentic." And that theme changed his life. He stopped conforming to what he thought he needed to be. I thought that was a powerful message. And then this last week, I did a podcast for another Swedenborgian minister, Reverend Sage Cole, for her program, Be Love, Be Honest, Be Useful. And she was asking me questions about my own spiritual development. And there again, the courage to be authentic became a sort of a theme. How do you overcome your fears to be authentic? And if that wasn't enough, I kept hearing the same theme all week. I caught up with a friend, and all she wanted to ask me was, how could she lead a more authentic life? And then in another conversation, a friend shared that I had done his wedding, and he shared that the defining moment in his adult life was when he went through with his wedding despite the disapproval of his parents over the ethnicity of his partner. And he really saw that as a turning point, that he had stepped away. Of course, this many years later, it's not a big deal, nobody cares, but it was a defining moment when he was being authentic and refusing to conform. And then, if that wasn't enough, I had a dear friend of mine and someone I had been a mentee of years ago. His name is Rishi Jaitley. Sent me a Substack article he wrote, and I can put it into the newsletter next week. But it's called The Wonder Years, and he shares that going through his life, he worked at Google, he was at Twitter, he eventually became the head of India Twitter. He worked on the Obama campaign. He was a finance committee member of the 2007 race for Kamala Harris in San Francisco. So very involved at the kind of highest moments in American culture and American life. And he laments in the piece that he's politically homeless now. And he has this question. He says, where has all the authenticity gone? So this theme of authenticity is just coming at us right and left. People are craving it. We all want to be more authentic, but somehow it's not really working. We're not succeeding. And as I've mentioned before in other sermons, when I speak on college campuses now, the students no longer ask me questions publicly, but they line up privately, fearful that if they were their authentic self, it could get them into trouble. So as the students told me, one student told me, but many have said this, I keep my head down, my mouth shut, and my opinions to myself until I graduate from this place, which I thought was so sad because I see college and education as an opportunity to test your ideas and hear new ideas. I shared that story about the college students at one of my trainings that I do for cultural translation. And interestingly, afterward, one of the adults stayed behind. These are all adults, right? I'm dealing with people in their mainly, let's say, midlife. And he stayed after. He said, I'm just like one of the kids, he said. And I don't say what I think anywhere. I'm terrified. And he said, in fact, I've told my kids who are now in college, keep your ideas to yourselves. Just focus on your grades. And for him, he really believed that to be inauthentic, that would help them preserve their careers. And now, as we have our election coming up on Tuesday, I saw a fascinating statistic this week that Gen Z, who prides itself, the younger generation, who prides itself on being very authentic and seeking authenticity more than any other generation, that uh, half of them have said that they've lied about what they're going to do for the election, or just obfuscated when it came up. They didn't want to tell anybody what they're voting because they don't want to offend anybody. They don't want to hurt anybody's feeling, but they just didn't feel they could be authentic. So we have this struggle. We want to be authentic, but there's good reasons why people are not authentic. In the cases we just looked at, if it can get you in trouble in school and ruin your career and ruin your dating life, doesn't feel safe to be authentic sometimes at school. In your career, it could be the same thing where you feel like if you say the wrong thing and you're inauthentic, you're authentic, but it's not popular, you could maybe lose your job. So people are afraid. So it's not as easy as just always say whatever you think and always be authentic. It's complicated. It's hard to navigate. I remember back in the 1990s, I was on the board of a gay youth organization in Massachusetts, and I'd often get calls from kids who were kicked out of their home because they were essentially abused by their parents or their family when they came out. And so when other kids would call me and they'd ask my advice about, should I come out? I would often say, no, don't do it. Not now, not while you're living under that roof. It may not be safe for you to be authentic. So in some cases, being authentic can really risk your safety. It's not as easy as it sounds. During the message last week, Matthew, the speaker, challenged us and he said, there are people in this congregation who are wearing masks right now. And I thought, well, he's right. We all do sort of wear masks. And this past week, we celebrated Halloween. Halloween is a tradition that interestingly comes out of pagan cultures. And they believed as the summer was ending and the darkness was coming in the fall, that this was a unique time when evil spirits could roam our world, break through and roam our world. And so their form of protection was a mask, and they dressed as scary demons and scary figures to fool these demons that were coming into the world so they wouldn't be attacked. So we literally, that came out of wearing masks to protect yourself. We wore masks during the COVID period, right, to protect ourselves. And we wear masks figuratively to protect ourselves as well. So we face this paradox. Authenticity might be the most important value that people have, but we have well-founded fears for not being authentic. And the question is, how do we manage them? How do we overcome them? I think the first thing we need to do is shift our beliefs that our self-worth is what other people tell us it is. I'll just share my own life. I've had a history of not conforming to the status quo, whether it be my party affiliation, my sexual orientation, or being a minister in a very strange, small denomination that no one has ever heard of. In each case, there have been efforts to sort of punish me for that, for my lack of conformity. And when you're being punished, it's quite painful, it's quite lonely. But I will say in my life, and I'd be curious to hear about it in yours, one theme came through. In my life, I knew God loved me. These people who might be saying horrible things about me without really knowing me didn't matter because I knew God loved me. And I believe that developing that sense and knowledge and awareness that we are loved regardless of what we do, we are loved by God, that is a very anchoring principle. And that allows us to be authentic. At least it has been for me. Our fears of what others think can subside when we feel the unconditional love of God. In 1 John 14, it says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear expects punishment. The person who is afraid has not been made perfect in love." The more we're grounded in this unconditional love through God and hopefully through family members and through parents and through adults in our life, the less the views of others matter. And living an authentic life can lead us to a really great life. Authenticity matters. Swedenborg shares that it has a cosmic power, that when we pass into our next life, all of us will have to become more authentic. Our ability to wear masks, our ability to pretend is actually gone in the next life. We are who we are, and it's revealed to everyone. So we tell stories about people who are still trying to pretend to be something, but it's revealed. And in fact, all of us will receive a life review where we see who we really were on this earth, not what we pretended to be. So when pretension is lost and our authentic self comes through, that is what happens in the next life, and it's all done, interestingly, without shame. So to the degree that we can be authentic in this life, we make a easier transition into the next. So what's the real big reason that most of us wear masks, that we're not authentic? In my experience, the word comes to mind is shame. The fear that if you find out my deepest secrets, like if you knew who I really was, that you wouldn't like me. You're only liking me, you only care about me because of the image I'm projecting. But if you really knew me, you wouldn't. Now, getting to that part of a trusting relationship with someone where we can be who we really are is hard work. It requires trust. In the leadership program that I'm a member of, that I've talked about before, they have a very chilling sometimes way of introducing ourselves at the beginning. It's chilling because every time that happens, I get nervous. And it starts with saying, "If you really knew me, you'd know," and fill in the blank. And I encourage you to try to answer that question yourself right now privately. But if you really knew me, you'd know what? Well, when you get very authentic people, they share things that are very um, revealing and could be shame-based if they're told to someone who's judgmental or critical. And when that happens, when you're in a group, people will say, "If you really knew me, you'd know I'm in a sexless marriage. If you really knew me, you'd know I'm bored and exhausted right now. If you really knew me, you'd know I'm wrestling with alcohol. If you really knew me, you know that there are days I don't wake up excited about life at all. If you really knew me at my core, you know that I think I'm a big failure. If you really knew me, you know I'm thousands and thousands of dollars in debt, and I have no way of paying it off. If you really knew me, you know I hated my job. I hate my job. And if you really knew me, you know I'm not in love with my kids. All the things that people might share, you can see how scary it is. You get the idea that when we are in a trusted space and we can really share, these authentic things come out, and actually all of us have them, but we don't feel safe saying them. But we are magnetically attracted to authentic people. When you've met them, if you've ever met them, and I hope you have some in your life, and maybe you're one of them, they are really magnetic. People want to be around them. These people have done the work in their own life. They've integrated their shadow side. They've looked at their weaknesses and they've had the courage to authentically say who they are. So, should you just blurt out to every person you meet everything about yourself? I don't think so. We've discussed already that you have to use wisdom in the degree that we're authentic with whom, and it has to be safe. It has to be worth it. You know, Jesus said, "Don't throw your pearls before swine's feet," meaning you do have to gauge the situation. Doesn't sometimes just sharing your views is not going to serve any purpose. But when you can build trusting relationships with people, really trusting relationships, and I hope we can do that in this church community, then it's awesome to be authentic, where others can feel safe. We can't control if others make us feel safe when we share, but we can control what we do for others, right? And you've probably met that person where you're sharing a personal thing about yourself and it's not a great thing and you're really being authentic. And then you see just a little facial expression or a comment like, "Oh, really?" Or just the slightest twitch. They don't have to even say a word, but we recoil. We're not going to tell the rest of the story. We've got the vibe. They're not going to let us be authentic and they're judging us. And so we recoil. And there are other people who, when you share your deepest, most authentic parts of yourselves, they can signal with their facial expressions, their questions, that they love us for who we are. There's no shame, and we can go deeper and deeper. So we want to be that loving person. We want to be the person who's curious when we hear things we don't agree with in another person. You can't control how others treat you, but you can control how you treat others. And the challenge for all of us is to become more courageous, to be our authentic self, while also becoming much less judgmental to other people. It's a gift to ourselves and it's a gift to others. We need to be curious. This op-ed that I referred to earlier in the sermon by Rishi, where he's very frustrated. He's frustrated with a culture where he says there's no curiosity anymore. And he says, what if the winners of the future are those who lead communities of people who are devoted to challenging their originality, their permission to go off script and ponder? And I believe that's the challenge for this community, Church of the Holy City, that we need to become a place in Washington and online where we offer people with different viewpoints, different lifestyles, different ways of being, love and curiosity, no matter how different. In being authentic listeners, we become more authentic ourselves and we build a culture of trust. This is what our world craves right now, a safe place, a sanctuary, where from the deepest core they can be whoever they are, and a place where there's no need to forgive. There's no need to forget. You know your mistakes, and you know mine. Amen. So at this time, we'll open it up to any questions or comments, thoughts.
Um, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hi, sorry,
please.
I didn't raise my hand. I can't figure out how to do it on the phone.
Cool.
But so my question was, yeah, so about authenticity and shame. And I guess my question is, sometimes the feeling of shame that we have in like admitting something about ourselves is because, there's a part of that feeling that can actually maybe be something healthy. Like we know that we're like greedy, or we know that we have these dimensions and sides sort of kind of like our shadow self that are bad and that we should want to kind of fix, and that there's a sense of shame associated with that can actually be maybe productive. Do you think that though creating like non-judgmentalness in others, uh so when I guess when you're talking about shame, I imagine you mean kind of shame and worrying about like the judgment of others and kind of like repressing or keeping those sides secret, or do you mean trying to get rid of the sense of shame about those sides of ourselves that we actually do want to fix and make better?
I'm see if I understand the question. So are you saying that if we um, are non-judgmental to people,
Yeah,
that we're encouraging their bad behaviors?
no, sorry. So, I guess so. It's specifically about like the issue and the like feeling of like shame. Like I I understand that there can be a feeling of shame in terms of like other people judging you, and that's what causes your feeling of shame. But sometimes, there's like a shame that about like different aspects of yourself that might be like an internal, I guess, shame, or that you're like bothered by some aspects of yourself, and that's kind of what encourages you to change. And I'm wondering whether that's an inherently unhealthy part of human nature that we feel kind of like, we admit, like if I admit like, oh, I'm a greedy person,
Yeah.
like if you really knew me, I'm a greedy person. We should feel a little bit ashamed about being greedy. Um, and so I'm just wondering whether there can be like something valuable about that sense of shame without necessarily encouraging people to be judgmental, and that shame coming from other people, I guess, if that makes sense. Like, is there value in that kind of internal voice that says like you should be ashamed of that side of yourself and you should change it?
Yeah, so let's just say that I am greedy and let's just play it out. I think that shame. So every week let's back up. Every week we talk about our sins and we confess them. So we're acknowledging that we have sins. And to the degree that you want to grow as a spiritual person, you have to become aware of your sins. Sins is another word for the things that you're not doing right in life, right? And the more you grow spiritually, the more you'll become aware of them. There'll be more of them will be brought to light. You'll become more and more aware as you grow. Shame, in my experience, though, is different than that. Okay, so that's a healthy spiritual growth process. I have these problems. Frankly, if I do share them with you, I am much more likely to change them, which is one of the gifts the Catholic Church has that we don't have, which is confession. Even sharing it out loud actually can explode shame and break it. And it's more likely you'll change if you share whatever it is you're thinking about. Shame, in my experience, is sort of like a dark space that grows mushrooms. I mean, it's like it's just it's not a healthy space to grow things. And we might justify not sharing with anybody our failures or our weaknesses or things we're not good about because we think, well, I'm ashamed and I'm gonna change it. I'm not gonna talk about it to anybody. It's a terrible thing. We all have those terrible things. But actually, the more you normalize it with people too and say you have faults or weaknesses, this is particularly true for pastors who sort of people think, oh, well, they've got their life together. No, they don't. They're all struggling. As we now know, it's much more transparent. We can see the struggles and scandals, frankly, of the clergy. So everybody's struggling with this, and light is a disinfectant, and sharing it can be very, very helpful. Now, who you share it with, that's the wisdom. You have to decide who. But I um, I think your overarching question is shame a positive generator for change? And I would use a different word. Awareness of the problems that we have is different than shame. And I'm really struck by the story of people, many near-death experiences in Swedenborg's story of people going into the next life and seeing their life review. And when you hear that, you engage all the people you ever impacted negatively and positively. And then that sounds absolutely frightening. But then there's the hitch. It says it's not done with shame. In other words, it's for spiritual growth and awareness, but it's not to humiliate or embarrass or shame. So that's kind of how I'm looking at shame, if that makes sense. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, that totally makes sense, and I think and I agree. So yes, like that what you're saying is that like shame actually leads us to kind of repress and hide away and maybe not even confront those sides of ourselves that we do need to change, and that by bringing it to light and kind of putting it out in the open and not being judged, we're actually more likely to fix those problems rather than just kind of letting them ferment, I guess. I think that makes sense.
Yeah. There's a whole school of thought that like shame is a good thing we've lost, that people should be ashamed of themselves like they used to be. And I'll just say my experience of God is that God is not a shaming God's love is not a shaming experience. God is unconditional love that is always challenging us if we're going to grow spiritually to see our shadow side, the things we need to repair. But I don't associate God with shame, but I do associate, and I actually believe shame is probably the driver of almost all the problems in the world. All the wars, all the problems are ultimately you can trace it back to a person struggling with something that they're ashamed about that plays out in very unhealthy ways. So it's shame is a big deal, and I don't think it's from God. But there is a school of thought, Matthias, where people are arguing, bring back shame, put people in stocks again in the town square, and that will stop the behavior. But great question, and it shows the challenging nature of it. That was a great question, Jose.
Yeah, that was very helpful, that discussion there. Having been raised Catholic, I always was thinking of shame as something that in its place could be a useful tool of self-moderation. But I think you're right. I think that it's in looking for that sort of golden mean, it's more about conscientiousness, perhaps. I'm struggling to find just the right word, but I see the point now that the way that you and Matthias just put it about how shame can actually lead to self-delusion. And something you said in the sermon also about how it's one of the reasons that we're attracted to people who are um what was the word that you used? Authentic. You take into an extreme, the authenticity side also can just be masking or actually overtly proclaiming narcissism. So one of the reasons that I think some people are attracted to those who come off as extremely authentic is because they find it liberating, the idea that I wish I could be as free and as open per se as that person. But sometimes that's just because the person has no conscientiousness or shame, and are willing to let certain aspects of themselves out that actually aren't healthy at all. I have that thought a lot going into Tuesday. Yeah, that was a very helpful discussion with you and Matthias. Thank you.
Yeah, one thing I love about our services that's so unique is the dialogue after the message, that we work these things out and we hear different perspectives, um, and it's great also because the idea that ministers have all the answers is silly. So it's great to hear the other perspectives, and yeah, and I think there is you know, we've all been around people who share too much, overshare right away. It's that awkward thing. It's like TMI, too much information. Um, so there, and that is probably driven by something else. That's not a healthy thing. But when you're around someone who's authentic, and you know that they actually will say what they think, and they're not particularly, they don't care what everybody thinks. It's kind of super powerful. It is a power. When you run into that narcissism, just the opposite. Roxanne, I see your hands up.
So I think that in today's age, we have to be vigilant about not allowing the other to steal our authenticity away, because there's something going on in society where the other can tell you who you are and what you are. And I think we need to know ourselves, or trust in knowing who we are, trust in our authenticity, because it can be stolen from us.
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying, but I would say we have 100% responsibility in our life. Like if it's not stolen by us, we give it away. That's our choice. In other words, when we allow ourselves to be defined by others, or we conform and pretend to be something to please others, and as I said, there's sometimes it makes sense. We understand it's a survival technique. But if that's the way we're operating, we can blame them and say, "Well, they took that away from me." But we give it away. We give away that it's because we get something back, which is either not rocking the boat, or sort of they like us better, or we think they like us better. But my experience is that even in the short run, when you are authentic, people can be repulsed by it, not like it, but they generally, in the long run, admire it. Whereas living your life conforming to what they're giving. So I would just put the responsibility back on us. Like it's ours to give away. They can't take it, but we do generally give it away. People, as you all know, people at the end of their life, what do they say? Oh, I wish I had said what I thought and been who I was. I gave it away. But I was convinced that I want everybody, to be happy.
Yeah, possibly, possibly. I just think, you know, um, just as an example, being told you're a racist or something very severe
Hmm.
like that. Um, and I think for the majority of us, we know whether or not we're a racist in our heart. So I think we need to be careful. Um, I mean, it's just something that I won't allow anyone else to do to me. Um, and I've gone through seminary, so just about on a daily basis, I was told that I was broken. And at some point, you have to say, well, perhaps to some degree, but not entirely.
Yeah, I do think that the forces of conformity on all sides, there's not just one ideological, the tribes are brutal right now, and particularly right now, brutal to be conforming to the group. And if you're not in the group, they will make your life miserable. Um, and so I'm not, the great nonconformists have all suffered. But that's
All
why I
things.
think tapping into this love of God that is unconditional, and knowing that is such a powerful thing. Honestly, I don't know what I would do without it. I do worry when I'm advising people who don't have a faith.
Yeah.
I'm a little lost for words, because there's a humanist argument for it, and I can make it. But for me, the supercharged the battery was the faith. The other thing is, so if someone calls me a racist, I think one, um, I can think about it for a little bit and say, my goodness, that's a pretty severe charge. It was flying around quite a bit a couple of years ago, more so than,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be weaponized. But at the same time, if we really want to grow spiritually, we could say, I wonder, are there things in my life that are racist? So in other words, it's not validating what they're saying, but it's a time to reflect. Like, hey, maybe that's something I need to work on. And if that's that they got it from this, well, I don't think that is, but I'm aware. Okay, they've made me aware of something by that charge, but I don't accept it, as you're saying. I don't necessarily accept it. But we have weaponized in our culture now names like that. They're very brutal and will shut you down in a second. The goal
Mm-hmm.
is to shut down dialogue, shut down discussion, and but it's a form of conformity. It's a way of you conforming to what I believe, and if you don't, I'm going to make you miserable. So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
very important, and I think we're going to be coming into a moment where authenticity is going to be truly authentic people are going to be much more admired and sought after in this next period, because we've done the conformity is exhausting, frankly, and it's soul crushing.
Mm-hmm.
So good for you for being who you are, and not conforming, and particularly in divinity school. It's tough. They can be quite brutal. They were to me.
Yes, they can.
Anybody else?
From a live congregation.
Yes, let's shift here to our host. We're going to go off to our host.
As I listened to the conversation, a question swam into my mind. Namely, can we, as I think we always wish to do, put our best foot forward and be authentic at the same time? And for those of you who may be old enough and remember the Nixon White House as I do, I recall that there were arguments within the White House at the time of crisis as Nixon was facing impeachment as to whether they should go the full hangout route or the partial hangout route. It seems to me that here we get to a matter of judgment. In other words, I would say being authentic is not synonymous with revealing every single thing about ourselves. It would seem to me it involves revealing the essence of ourselves, and there judgment comes into play. It's difficult. It's a difficult sort of judgment, at least as I view it.
I'd like for you to expand on that a little bit, Malcolm. I'm not quite sure what I mean about um, the, revealing your essence. That was an interesting comment, and I'd like to know a little more about that.
Well, I'm just wondering how we define authenticity. I don't think it makes sense to define it as simply opening ourselves up completely, revealing everything about ourselves, positive or negative. And if one accepts that, then it becomes a matter of judgment as to how to present ourselves. And it seems to me that it involves presenting oneself in a way that is not misleading, but there one gets into a question of judgment. Exactly what does one reveal about oneself? What does one not disclose?
Yeah, and I'll just say I agree with what Malcolm's saying, and I understand. And one thing I was trying to stress is the wisdom of making that decision. It's not a cookie cutter decision, and sometimes it was a matter of safety for people. Sometimes this really is their career, or it's just and so and it's also not, as Jose was saying when he did it, talking about just like narcissism. I'm just going to tell you all, just too much information. But I will say that if there's a scale of authenticity and non-authenticity, we're way on the my experiences, we're way on the we are very not very much authentic scale. So the challenge is much less for most of us is not, oh my gosh, if I share, I'll be sharing too much. The reality is that we live a secret life kind of, and we project a different life very often, and making that's the unhealthy space that we want to narrow that gap. If you know me in this form, and then you find out things about me outside that are completely contradictory, that's a problem. So I think it is a great way to be consistent. And there's that line about lying, that it's very hard when people lie to remember what you're lying about. Like, it's much easier to be honest. And I find authenticity is being honest. This is who I am. This is where I am. And yeah, so I think you're right on, Malcolm. Thank you for sharing that. And if you want to come back, I'm going to go to Jose now.
Also, Rich, just
Oh,
need to point out a question in the chat from
okay.
Louise.
What is the line between transparency and authenticity? I'm not sure, but I think that they're very similar. Sort of what you see is what you get. So I'm being very transparent with you, and that is authentic. And I find them very connected. I don't know if Louise has a different view on it, but I find them very connected. And in fact, what we need more transparency in the world. We need more people to tell us what's going on behind the scenes. We need more people to be like, if you really want to know what's going on in my life, I'm going to be transparent with you. This is, and we're not even aware ourselves sometimes why we say things or why we're angry or why we do things. We're not even sure, but we can work on that to become more transparent with other people and say, the real reason I'm angry about this is this. And I think they tie very nicely together. And I think we're coming into a world where transparency, things were very hidden by the people who are powerful from the public. And I think we're, including the church and then political leaders and business leaders. And I think for all of its embarrassments that we see now, the transparency of what's really going on behind the scenes, it's a healthy thing because it's the truth, and that's what was really happening. So I think that's a great question, and but I'd love for you to maybe you could just does that get to your
Yeah,
question?
that answers my question. I have felt very, very much that really the only way to survive in the world where there's so much intrusion from, all the media things and, the big brother in the sky who knows when you move before you do with your magazine subscriptions and all that other creepy stuff that goes on, that somehow living a transparent life is really the only way to cope with this because it's going to be found out somehow or other anyways. And if you are open about it, then you don't get the backlash perhaps of, trying to keep different secrets going. I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this, but so yeah, so I wondered, did that, is that what authenticity, is that a big part of authenticity, or is that just kind of like being out there for no reason or what?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it too much, but I really do feel like they're really kindred spirits, and the world's demanding more of that too, much more transparency. So thank you for raising that, Jose.
Yeah, I think that immediately last discussion, the Louise's question, it's actually related to something I was thinking about with respect to what Malcolm brought up, because um, since we all have different sides of ourselves, and sometimes they're even in conflict, different goals versus desires or behaviors, like I think that to be authentic, you can highlight, depending on the context of, say, the meeting or the discussion, certain aspects of yourselves that are true and still be authentic, even knowing that you do have drives in other directions as well. The test, I suppose, would be if you imagined that things were completely transparent, would someone call you out and say that you're being hypocritical? So I think you can be authentic and true to yourself, to certain aspects of yourself, but if you stray too far and then use that transparency as a test, would someone say, no, I don't think you are being authentic because you have so many contradictions there that it's hypocrisy now? I think
Yeah,
that's how they're related.
that's a great way of, I like the way you address that. And I am struck by this image of the next life with Swedenborg that, we will lose our ability to be hypocrites in the next life. That it literally shows up in your face, in your angelic face, like you people. And so people, he tells of stories of people trying to say things that are not true about themselves. One of which I just off the top of my head was a person who committed murder against this person's confronting them, and they're saying I didn't do it, and I don't know why I didn't do the poisoning, and it just doesn't work. It completely was transparent. There is no ability to obfuscate anymore, and it's an earthly skill set that it doesn't work anymore. We're liberated from it, but it's also frightening because um, hypocrisy is very much revealed in this next life. If we've been pretending to be something, that doesn't fly. So thank you for that. I like that hypocrisy angle. Roxanne?
I think words and language is a very, very tricky way to determine authenticity. I think for me, authenticity is revealed by how you walk the earth, what you do in your day. So that's, that's even more important for me than language, words. Yeah, I feel like that's where true authenticity lies.
Yeah, that reminds me of that phrase that's used quite a bit, which is, preach the gospel, and if you have to, speak. But it's essentially meaning that it's really how you live your life. That's what people are. And frankly, when we're looking at someone who says something about authenticity, right now people are very much looking at that contrast, right? You're saying this in your public speeches, but this is how you're behaving. So good contrast. And my goodness, we're getting our musical warning that we're coming up on the hour here at the Peck Estate. So I will now wrap up our discussion and we will move on to prayer. So thank you for a great discussion. Thanks for the give and take and clarifying each other's thoughts. I love it.